This is going to be a two-part video about a topic that's worried me for a long time. It's just part of the alarming use of domestic violence allegations to gain advantage for women. As I'm sure you know, this is totally out of control in family law battles, but domestic violence allegations are now being used in many other situations as well. Feminists have succeeded in getting domestic violence established as a very powerful legal bargaining chip, empowering women in all sorts of other situations. Today I'm talking about immigration law and false allegations of domestic violence which are being used to help women get permanent residency visas. Well, I'm going to now talk to Malcolm Henke, who's a Victorian man who fought a mighty legal battle to stave off false allegations of domestic violence from his Indian wife. And the really great news, he won and was awarded $100,000 in costs against the police. But his story is still pretty frightening. Hello, Malcolm. I'm really pleased you could join me here today.
Yeah, thanks, Bettina. Thanks for having me on.
Well, it's been taking a while to get this organised. We finally made it, so that's really good. Now, tell me about you. How old are you?
I'm 52.
Yeah, and tell me what you do for a living. You're a businessman, essentially, aren't you?
Yes, I'm a businessman. I started early when I was 16 in business and just worked hard. I've just been self-employed basically all my life. And most of my businesses are rural orientated.
Yeah,
and earth moving as well.
And some overseas stuff. You've done some work in India, business work.
Yes.
Business, yeah, and that's where you met your wife.
Yes. We met at a Christian convention in December 2010, and we seemed to get on quite well.
Yeah, and but you were going through a divorce, married after 35 years. I mean, it must have been a pretty tough time for you.
Yes, it was. I only ever had one woman in my life, and that was a woman that I expected that I would die with. But she had other ideas. So I was going through a very difficult time in that period when I first met my second wife. And to her credit, she actually did help me. She was actually very good and supportive.
Yeah.
But then we become romantic after there was no point in turning back to my first wife. We become romantically involved, and then she was insisting that I divorce my first wife and marry her, and she was putting a lot of pressure on at the time.
Yeah. And so you ended up marrying her and came back to Australia. And
yes.
I know you had a huge amount on your plate, working long hours, 20 hours a day, and you found she pretty quickly became very unhappy. Is that right?
Yeah, she was very unhappy. What I was doing at the time, it was only a spike in work, and it was only for a short period of time, like a matter of months, certainly not years or anything like that. So it was a spike in work, but she only did what she wanted to do. I was working. If she wanted to help, great. If she didn't, that was fine as well. So most of the time she was at home watching movies. Yeah,
but she was very unhappy with you, nagging, complaining, and at a certain point she attempted suicide. Is that right?
Yes. Well, even before we married, she attempted suicide twice in India, and both times I stopped that from happening. Once by hanging, and the second time by pills. And then in Australia, she was unhappy. She was nagging me, and she was suggesting that I was having affairs with other women constantly, which I was not. I was not having affairs with other women, but in her mind, I was.
So when she was in hospital, she became very violent towards staff.
Yes, she was very violent toward the staff, nurses and the doctors, and myself. And the staff had to physically restrain her when she was attacking me on more than one occasion. And before this incident, She come at me twice with knives when she said that I was having affairs with other women, and twice I had to disarm her. This is not long after we were married.
Yeah, it was
and
within
I
a year.
mentioned
It's within a year of being married. Yeah.
it was within a year. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And
I mentioned that to the staff, and they wrote all this down in their notes. I didn't know that they wrote it down, but they took very good notes, and they even wrote down my concerns of her behaviour before her hospital admittance as well. And they said to keep.
Go on. Yeah.
They said to keep knives away from her, and certainly do not have firearms in the house.
So they were concerned about your safety.
Absolutely.
Living with her. Yeah,
yes.
yeah. And there were some horrendous occasions sort of after that as well, where she would tell you if she had a gun, she'd kill you.
Yep.
Yeah. There were, I think, a couple of occasions where she attacked you with a shoe stand, was it? Can you tell me about these major occasions where it was really horrible physical abuse from her?
Yes, she would. I couldn't relax at home, even if I was looking on the computer at home. She was that paranoid that I was in touch and communicating with other women, when in actual fact I was just doing work.
Yeah.
And so she would not let me rest in the house. So I'd go out and I would sleep in the machine. And if she looked out the window or on the farm and could not see the machine working,
what sort of machine? Big tractor or something, is it?
Earth moving.
Earth moving. Okay.
Yeah. So I would go out in the paddock and have a sleep to try to get some rest, because I couldn't rest at home. And so I would come in, and then she'd be abusive toward me, and into the room. And after a while, when she would calm down, if I could just hold her and try to stop her from attacking me, she would calm down and come back to normal again. And
having a lot of pressure on you to change your will.
Yes.
And you have children who were beneficiaries in your will, and she insisted on becoming the sole beneficiary. Is that right?
That's right. That's right. She was nagging me on a daily basis about my will, and she was looked after very, very well, and with my boys. However, she didn't think that it was appropriate that my boys would be involved as well. She said that they were too young and too inexperienced to take on the responsibilities that I had, and that if I pass away, it would be best if she had the responsibilities, and then in her determination, when they were ready for it, she could transfer funds then, or assets. So she nagged on a daily basis, and I didn't want to do it, but she kept on in peace, because she said, you don't love me, you don't trust me, why don't you do it?
I mean, later she was to claim that you weren't looking after her financially.
Yes.
She went on Centrelink and so on.
Yes.
But you were actually being very generous, I understand.
Absolutely. And that's what hurt me the most. She was telling my family and my friends that I cut her off, and not only them, but the police and the women's group as well. She said that I was financially abusive toward her, which was absolute rubbish, absolute and utter rubbish. When she was saying that she had no money, she was taking $300 per day, every single day, 7 days a week. And also she had unfettered access to accounts in India, and with between 50 and 60,000. And in turn, she was getting Centrelink, even though she was collecting. She was doing very, very well out of me, and I had to prove that, and I did prove it.
So you were never physically abusive to her?
No. It was only when when she was attacking me, when she would have an episode, whatever she was going through, I would have to grab her and try to stop her from attacking me, and especially with weapons. You can imagine being thrashed with an extension cord, with the knobby ends of it, and also a half-inch fire poker as well of solid steel. It's not pleasant. It is not pleasant. And even I would try to stop her, and then when she would calm down, she would do first aid on my wounds. I would be bleeding afterward, and she would wrap my wounds up and stop the bleeding, and she would come down to normal again.
But on your second wedding anniversary, she then made a complaint to the police. And tell me about what happened then.
I was getting ready for our second wedding anniversary, preparing to take her out for tea. She said, "I'm not going out for tea. I'm going to call the police and make a complaint about you." And I begged her, "Don't do it, don't do it." And she did. I wasn't even in the house. I left the house when she said she was going to do that. I was not even in the house. I was maybe 300 metres away, but I could see her drive out the driveway. I was not in the house when she went to the police and made the allegations of domestic violence against me.
Yeah. And then, of course, you had a court appearance, and she hid the... I thought this was extraordinary. She hid the car keys so you couldn't get... You had enormous trouble getting to that court. Is that right?
That's right. The police came and saw me at 3 o'clock on Sunday morning, got me out of bed, said that I had to appear in court at 9:30 Monday morning. When I went to go to court, no keys. And the court was an hour and a half away. I had to call a taxi to come and pick me up, to go to the major town, and then hire a car to get to court. In the meantime, my solicitor was ringing constantly, "Where are you? Where are you?" And he had to keep on putting our case off. And I was 2.5 hours late. And if I could add, when I was on my way to the court, and just imagine the police on my doorstep, 3 o'clock Sunday morning, I was on my way to court, I had to appear 9:30 Monday morning. There was a women's group rang me up. It was a men's referral centre, and they were ringing me up on the way to court and saying, "We want you to present yourself to this group that we have so we can change your behaviour." And I said, "Hang on a minute, I'm just going to court. It's not even been proved yet." And they said, "We're not being judgmental, but we want you to come." And I said, "Oh, this has to be all finished with first." And they're absolutely insistent that I go to a men's referral centre when nothing was proved. Nothing was proved. And it was all completely false.
Mm-hmm. So you actually had then a 13-month period defending domestic violence charges, a series of court appearances, and you obviously had lawyers. I mean, I think one of the points I want to make here is you were lucky in the sense that you could afford to have good lawyers to defend you. I mean, if you hadn't been in that situation, what do you think would have happened to you?
I think it would have been sunk, because it seems after going through this court process, it seems like 99% of the time, if not more, the men lose. The men lose because, one, a lot of men are on wages and they can't afford the time to fight this. They can't afford the cost of it to actually employ lawyers. And I had two, and I employed a QC as a barrister and another senior lawyer as well, very experienced men. But I felt so strong about this.
Yeah, you spent $100,000 on trying to defend yourself. I want to talk a little bit about the hospital records. Of course, that was really important because they had a record of the fact that this was a very unstable woman and that she'd been physically abusive. She'd attacked members of staff. She'd attacked doctors. And they had a record that she'd, in the past, been physically abusive to you, and that they were concerned about your safety. Now, tell me about the role that played in your case.
That was absolutely critical because when I told the police what she was like, they did not believe me one bit. They just dismissed it. And I was able to subpoena those records, and I didn't know exactly what was in those records until a day in court. And there, lo and behold, in the records, it was all documented, the times that she was violent to the staff in the hospital, and also violent toward her husband, which was me, and the times where they had to physically restrain her from violence toward me. So those are concerns about her past behaviour, when she was attacking me with knives, and other instruments before that as well. It was all documented. And also for their advice on not having knives and firearms in the house.
I mean, the fact that they gave you that advice showed that they absolutely believed you, saw her as a violent woman, gave you advice to deal with this violent woman. So it's really strong support for what you were saying, wasn't it?
Very, very strong. Very strong.
God,
And
you must have been relieved. You must have been incredibly relieved that day to have that.
I was. After that, another day in court, we wanted those hospital records again, and those records mysteriously went missing. They weren't there. Who hears about evidence that gets missed in court? It just doesn't happen.
Yeah. But as you say, the magistrate had evidence.
The magistrate already had very good notes about it all, and he couldn't find where they went. However, he still had all those notes, and so did we.
He must not have been happy that they disappeared.
He was very, very cross. He was cross. He was cross with the prosecution all the way through this ordeal. And he gave them chance. He gave them chance to pull the case as well, and they did not.
They kept going. Yeah.
They kept on going.
Yeah, kept on going. And one of the things you mentioned earlier, a women's group that came to you even before you'd had your first court appearance, wanting to, treating you as a man who was violent, wanting to offer your help from your violence. And really bullying you into trying. That's an extraordinary story, isn't it?
You could imagine how a man felt going to court to answer these allegations that were false, and then at 3 o'clock in the morning, I was told I had to go to court 9:30 Monday morning. Going to court in a hired car because my wife had hidden the keys, and then a women's group on my back as well, saying you have to attend a men's referral centre and a men's attitude change. And I said, these allegations have not even been proved. I've just gone my way to court. And they said, no, you have to come. We're not being judgmental, the lady said, but you have to come. And I was not happy. I was not happy.
And then you had another women's group working against you throughout the court cases, supporting your wife, giving your wife advice about how to make more allegations against you, and really coaching her in the court situation. Is that what you said?
Absolutely coaching in every turn, and even in the court when my wife was in the witness stand, the women's group lady, and she was a solicitor, and she was there nodding and shaking her head and preempting my wife, what to say in the witness stand. And to my barrister's credit, he picked that up and told her to desist from that. And that's when the magistrate put his head up from his notes, and he tore strips off of that woman. And she behaved herself after that. But it was absolutely disgusting how they behaved themselves in court. So cocky and so full of themselves. Yeah.
And of course, it's this believe the victim issue. I mean, of course, women's groups have a very important role in supporting, I'll say, genuine victims of violence. And I think they can do a terrific job. But what we have is this situation where they choose to ignore any evidence coming forth. They choose to only believe what, in this case, was a woman, a really disturbed woman, a violent woman, and they decided to believe everything she said and ignore the other evidence coming out. That's what's extraordinary, isn't it?
That's right. And I'm not here to bag the women's group completely. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying we don't need them. In a lot of cases, they do good work. But my little bit that I've been through, what I can see is 95% of the cases, they don't need to be there. There's maybe 5% are the ones that they need supporting, and the men really are super violent, and they're the ones they should concentrate on. But what they're concentrating on are very superficial cases and even false cases. And I can see that that's 95%. That's just my opinion. I don't know figures, but that's just what my opinion is and my experience.
And of course, I mean, in this situation, they were really encouraging her to take up issues that she might not have even thought of in terms of broadening the level, this sort of accusations against her. Well, I'm going to be doing a second video after this showing this is happening in America, particularly, where women's groups are very much part of helping people make fraudulent immigration claims. And that's, I suppose, what we haven't really talked about, Malcolm, is the fact that this whole case seems to be very much related to helping her get permanent residency. I mean, she was presumably hoping to divorce you, to get a big hunk of your assets, and to get permanent residency by making false accusations about sexual violence. Do you think that physical violence? Is that how you see it?
That's part of it. What I can see, there was a huge carrot there for her to do this, and it was no coincidence that she went to the police on our second wedding anniversary. She went to the police for one in April 2018. She didn't go to the police straight away. She waited for our second wedding anniversary. And I didn't know at the time. I didn't know what the significance is. However, a lady has to be married for 2 years to get permanent residency and all the benefits that go with it. And I didn't know that at the time, but I do now. And that's why the timing was there.
Yeah, and the domestic violence allegations can help that process.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And that's one of the issues I want to be talking about in particularly in our second video, that there's enormous amount of evidence from here in Australia and overseas that domestic violence allegations are part of immigration fraud. And it's a major issue. But the good news for you is the fact that you won. So you... and this was the case essentially about the police were taking action against you, and the magistrate ruled. Tell me what he said.
He threw it out. He threw the whole lot out, and even the intervention order that automatically goes in place as well. He threw that out as well. He said there is no need for the interim intervention order. So his final words were, there is no need for an intervention order.
Yep.
There is no case to answer. And he said that I warned you prosecutors before about this case. He was basically saying that he warned them about pulling it. They did not pull the case. They kept on going till the death knell. And he said, I did warn you people that there will be costs awarded, and that's what I'm doing today as well. Your case has not been proved, and I'm awarding costs against the police.
And the costs were about $100,000. And you're still waiting, of course, to receive that from the police, who are arguing that you didn't need fancy lawyers and so on. That's tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, this is something else I didn't realise. When the costs are awarded, it's not necessarily the case that you'll get 100% back.
Yeah.
What they're arguing now is that because I could afford good lawyers, but I didn't need them. They were saying that I didn't need them. I could have had a junior lawyer that would have done the job for half the cost. And then they're saying, because of that, we only want to give you half the money. And I'm fighting tooth and nail about that. Because in my case, if I was found guilty, I would be in jail. It was a custodial offence. It was very, very serious. And that's why I did all I could. Plus, it was absolutely false. Absolutely false. So I did all I could.
It's a terrifying thought how many men are probably in jail as a result of these sort of accusations, isn't it? And you must have thought about that.
Oh, absolutely. And this is one of the reasons why I fought so hard. And because I have got the means to do it. And it's only through hard work. I haven't had anything given to me. It's just through my brains and my hands that I've been successful in business. I can afford it, but I was fighting for the men who can't afford it. The poor beggars that are in prison and even have lost their lives by taking their own life because of all this nonsense. And that's what I felt very, very strong about. Just not myself, it was other men as well. And even to give hope to some other men that if you keep fighting, if you didn't do it, keep fighting. Keep fighting.
You actually were very near suicide at one point, you told me.
Yeah, I was. And that was when my wife was getting me to change my will. And she succeeded in doing that. And then after I changed my will, she was at me to kill myself. She said, my boys don't want to know me. I haven't got any friends that don't want to know me. Goki, you've got no right to live. Your God doesn't want to know you. Your God has forsaken you. Go and kill yourself. And she was at me to kill myself. And I was very nearly at that point. I actually did write some notes.
Yeah. And of course, as we've been talking about, that there must be a lot of men in that situation, and it's really tragic. And it's really tragic that we have a situation where feminists have managed to influence our laws to the extent that it is very easy for women to make these sort of allegations, and how the whole justice system supporting them, and very rarely do men like you manage to win through and prove their case. And you were just lucky in a sense that you happened to be with a violent woman and could prove that. I mean, if it had just been one-way allegations, it's so hard for men to show that they're not true.
And I would consider myself to be a normal man, and how I think my motivation is for my wife and children. That must be how we're hardwired. And that's what my motivation was with work, just my wife, my children. If that's taken away, and especially the men that cannot see their children, you feel like you're thrown on the scrap heap, that your very presence or being is not there anymore. Your wife and your children, and be supportive of your family. If that's destroyed, a man is a shell. And that's how I felt, an absolute shell. And I thought, what's the point of living? I thought if I felt like that, how many men actually go ahead with that when they're going through all these allegations, and they've got nothing else to live for? They're just a shell of a man.
Yeah. Well, you're not a shell of the man, Malcolm, and I'm so pleased that I have you here today, speaking out about this. I think it's a brave thing to do, and hopefully inspiring other men to defend themselves. And of course, we all have to work harder to find ways of supporting men who are in this situation, who can't afford the lawyers, and get very isolated and very vulnerable in this circumstance. So great pleasure to have you, and I hope this leads to a lot of people addressing this really important issue. Thank you, Malcolm.
Thank you very much, Bettina, for having me.